Okay, let's start. So, hello everyone. My name is Jasmina Savic. I'm a founder and managing director of Phortas, a consulting company in regulatory affairs and drug development. Today we are hosting a live webinar on topic called EMA approval is no longer enough. So, discussing EU HTA and joint clinical assessment for European market access. In today's webinar, Dr. Darius G. Namjo and Dr. Thomas Ecker will be speakers. Dr. Namjo has more than 17 years of experience in global regulatory affairs, including EMA pre- and post-approval interactions. He's a director, senior regulatory lead at Phortas, and multi-stakeholder advisory board member of erdera. Dr. Thomas Ecker is a seasoned market access professional with over 20 years of experience. He is focused on HTA and pricing and reimbursement in Germany and EU HTA processes. Thomas is a co-founder of Ecker Ecker. Just very briefly, some webinar housekeeping. So thank you very much for following these rules. First, please keep your microphone muted during the presentation to avoid background noise. Cameras may remain switched off during the webinar. Webinar will be recorded. Questions can be submitted during the Q&A session after the presentations, or of course you can then raise a hand and ask the question. And follow us on LinkedIn to stay informed about future webinars, regulatory updates, and industry insights. Now I will give a floor to our first speaker, Darius. So Darius, you could maybe share your slides.
I will.
Thank you.
Before that, so thank you for the introduction, Jasmina, and I'm happy to present today on the regulatory affairs perspective on this new process for EU HTA and JCA in Europe. So my talk will be sorted in the following order. I will first of all introduce the marketing authorization application and JCA's two mandatory steps for European product launch. Then I will speak about the concrete touch points of the MAA and the JCA processes, followed by discussing what does this paradigm shift mean for global or EU development program, and finally to understand the requirements early GSC and further parallel competent authority and HTA interaction options. In the regulatory affairs world, since decades by now, we have an established system on European level. And this is regulated by the Directive 2001/83/EC in general, and also then for the EMA centralized procedure in the Regulation EC 726/2004. As many people will know, we have an upcoming new pharmaceutical law in Europe, and this will also then impact these documents and will lead to a new regulation directive. How these new documents and laws will concretely play out with the EU HTA regulation is still to be defined. On the market access side, and Thomas Ecker will certainly provide much more detail in his presentation, there have been traditionally requirements on local level for local law only, and that was for HTA and pricing reimbursement. Now, with the EU HTA Regulation 2021/2282, there's for the first time also a European aspect of HTA, and that aspect is limited to the clinical evaluation, and this is why it's also called joint clinical assessment, because it comprises all the national HTA bodies which are relevant in that context that provide an assessment on European level together. All the other HTA aspects, for example, economical ones and the actual pricing and reimbursement decision, they all remain on national level. In this topic, many people ask, is my product actually applicable for the JCA? And that is what is explained here now on this next slide. This is a phased approach, and we have already seen now the first JCAs that are for the first wave of products. These are medicinal products for oncology on the one hand, and ATMP, certainly also ATMPs for oncology indications. And then in 2028, there will be the next wave for orphan designated medicinal products. And in 2030, it's opened up then to all other types of medicinal products. From 2026, so basically in these days actually, there also will be the first selected high-risk medical devices which need to undergo the process. Importantly is to state that while these are different types of products, not all of them will be subject to the JCA. For oncology medicinal products, here the law is very clear on the EU HTA that only those containing a new active substance will be part of the JCA process. For all other types of products that require to undergo JCA, it is the case that it can be a new or already authorized substance. However, there's a cutoff date. It's basically the date when the centralized procedure was invented. It's the 20th May 2004. So in case you have an active substance that's older than that and was already registered in Europe before, it will not be part of the JCA. But where it is later than that date, and if it's already authorized, it will be part of JCA. However, the other important prerequisite is that you need to submit the dossier in agreement with the Article 8.3 of the Directive 2001/83/EC. So meaning this would be a dossier mainly comprised of own data. So only in this combination it is applicable in case, for example, you have a hybrid product or well-established use or any other legal base, they are all outside of the JCA. For products that already have gone through the JCA, which is at the moment a very limited number, in case these companies would decide to do an indication extension afterwards, also this indication extension procedure would undergo JCA as well. As we have people from different disciplines here on the call, I wanted to shortly also highlight the difference in the focus of the MAA assessment and the HTA or the JCA assessment also specifically. While the EMA or the CHMP, the decisive entity at the EMA that decides on MAAs, will look at the absolute benefit-risk ratio of a product in their decision. On the HTA side, this is different. Here, it is they look at relative effects and always at the additional benefit of a product towards existing health technologies. And also in this context, it's important to note that these are not only other medicinal products, not only some direct competitors, but it can also be medical devices or other sorts of products. However, despite the evaluation focus is so different, we strongly recommend to provide in both the dossiers for the EMA and the JCA a consistent messaging to both the regulators and the HTA entities. And one key document in this context is the clinical overview, and where we really recommend to consider modifying the actual writing strategy as this document is actually shared by the health technology developer, so basically the applicant in the regulatory world, with the HTA coordination group for the assessment. So therefore, we really recommend that you already include HTA relevant data in this clinical overview. One further topic here to the audience, which possibly some people already know, but I wanted to shortly explain, is an important term in the HTA context. It's the so-called PICO. Because this really drives the scope of the JCA dossier. And here the P stands for population. It's a group of patients covered by a certain indication. However, EU member states have the rights to also request certain subpopulations in their context. Then there's an intervention. It's the investigational treatment. That's the I. The C is a comparator. It's the relevant available alternative health technology, again, per member state. And then it's the outcome, it's the additional effectiveness and safety benefit. And again, that will be then measured against the available products in a certain member state. Therefore, it means the complexity here comes in by the fact that in different member states, different situation can exist on approved products, on accessible products, and therefore the PICOs may actually look different. And this is why I brought in here this image of and this really exists. It's mountains in Spain. They are called Picos de Europa, which symbolizes the complexity that may apply in this context. And specifically complex cases could be, for example, oncology products where there are multiple lines of comparators existing, and they may even have different application in different member states. Now coming to a quite complex slide, however, also a very important one. It really shows the touch points between the market authorization procedure and the JCA. And that is why now in the future, a very close cooperation between the regulatory and market access teams will be key to actually navigate this complex process. We have here on the upper part the regular process with the EMA with the key time points. Once you submit your market authorization dossier, it will be first of all validated, and then the procedure will be started, and that's signified by the D0. At that time, also, you submit the draft SMPC and the clinical overview of that EMA procedure to also the HTA coordination group for the JCA procedure. In the regulatory procedure, then, this runs through until day 120, and you get your first list of questions, and the clock stop period sets in, which usually takes possibly 3 months. However, during this clock stop period, at day 120 plus 10, it is already the case that in the HTA world, the PICO scoping is finalized, and this will be then informed to the health technology developer. One important aspect here in this context is in case a competitor would be approved during that time frame, this can affect your PICOs, meaning as a company, it is very important that you have a very active monitoring of the competitor environment to predict that such approval can happen, and also then that you already pre-prepare your PICOs for such situation. At the 120 plus 30, in the HTA procedure, there's a possibility to have an assessment scope explanation meeting where then the HTD can ask questions to the HTA coordination group to better understand possibly the scoping. But I will detail the scope of this meeting on the next slide. In the regulatory procedure, then at the end of 80, you receive normally a further list of questions and a further clock stop. And during all that time, you also in your market access team will then write the dossier for the submission at day 210 minus 45 at latest, or usually 100 days after the final scoping had been communicated to the HTD. Then at day 210 minus 30, there will be a request to the HTD, and in contrast to the regulatory procedure, there's not a clock stop period on the HTA side. So this is a quite hectic phase, and then a response needs to be submitted until the 210 minus 15 latest, and then there could be further back and forth questions, especially in case, and that is again very important as this can come from the EMA procedure, in case of the EMA would trigger indication changes, especially if they would be triggered late in the procedure. Overall, as there are only 100 days to prepare the JCA dossier, we clearly recommend to pre-prepare the dossier because to write that up in 100 days may be nearly impossible. In the regulatory procedure, then at day 210, the CHMP opinion is issued, hopefully positive, and then the approval official, so the EC decision is done at day 277, while the JCA report, so the endorsement of the JCA procedure is done at day 307, and then the report as well as the CHMP assessment report are published subsequently. Very shortly on this assessment scope explanation meeting, it's a virtual meeting taking usually 1 hour. And as said, so you can ask questions on the assessment scope for the JCA, and you can then inform the HTA bodies also about updates from the EMA market authorization assessment. Especially, they would be interested to understand if it's likely that a change to indication may occur because that is an impact on the PICOs. However, in this context, also we should mention that there's anyway a unilateral information flow for the EMA to the HTA coordination group during this process, as is mandated in the implementing regulation that is applicable for this context. So basically, the HTCG will get this information as in any case, also on any major objections that are raised in the European market authorization procedure. For the meeting itself, the following participants are recommended. It's the lead for the JCA from the market access side. Then it's a regulatory lead for the MA, or companies may also choose to combine these roles in a role of a so-called submission lead, so really having a single person overseeing both processes as they are so much intertwined. And then, a clinical person that is really knowledgeable or has been strongly involved to the clinical development pathway is also very much appreciated. So we call it here clinical evidence generation, depending on company. It has different titles, but this is the general scope of that role. What does it now mean if you look at the overall development strategy, either in global or also EU-centered context? Many developers, not all of them, have dealt with the situation before that. First of all, the drug was developed to satisfy the regulatory requirements, and then subsequently some further development may have been done to also satisfy some local HTA requests. However, this is now a paradigm shift, and developers really need to prepare to satisfy both worlds, basically, ideally from the beginning or latest before the pivotal clinical development is initiated. And this is also because there's meeting possibilities, the JSC, which I will detail later on, where it's not eligible anymore once we have passed the initiation of the pivotal trials. Overall, while the general evaluation focus, as I explained previously, of EMA and HTA coordination group will always be different, there are some efforts ongoing between these worlds to streamline common expectations and evidence requirements. And there's been a series of workshops between heads of the HTA agencies group and the EMA on that topic. And both parties actually realized what we're actually looking for are data that will mitigate evidence uncertainties in data. So that's very, very much a shared goal of both worlds. And also there have been some proposals done here in this document. I can highly recommend that you sort out this document, which is here depicted on the right side. And some proposals done here were, for example, randomized registry studies, or what is called the proper use of observational real-world data. Proper means in this case that the data is of high quality, it is prospectively planned, and also up to the standard in general of quality. And one example, once it's really prospectively planned, which is really useful in the context to develop, are, for example, natural history studies for a rare disease context. Now, some words also on the possibilities to understand directly from the players their expectations. And one key possibility is the joint scientific consultation, the JSC. And this is a virtual meeting which takes 3 hours usually, so it's really long. It's in contrast to the EMA scientific advice, a one-shot option. So at the moment, there's not a possibility to have a follow-up JSC. There are 2 variants of that. So you can have an advice on HTA level only. So you have a couple of HTA bodies then here meeting with you and they then build up a consensus on European level. Or what we actually would recommend for the usual case would be then a GSC, which would also include the EMA, so that you have the view of the regulators and the HTA bodies in one meeting. And the main scope of that meeting is really to align the pivotal study design and also further evidence requirements that may apply. And again, the overall goal is for both parties, the regulators and the HTA bodies, to reduce the residual uncertainty. And again, only products for which the pivotal trials were not yet started will be eligible for this kind of interaction. What's also strongly recommended is to test here the waters on the PICOs to be expected. As I explained, it will be very difficult to write the JCA dossier in 100 days. So what we clearly recommend is that you really pre-prepare and simulate PICOs, and then also you could discuss the simulated PICOs in this meeting. And you could also address national HTA expectations, because while as one part certainly is the JCA requirements to be discussed here, this meeting is also open to discuss some local aspects, for example, economical aspects that will then at the end be the evaluation on the national level. The downside at the moment is that only a very limited number of JCA slots actually exists. There's a ramp up ongoing, and the next application period will open up on the 23rd of September 2026. In case one is not able to get the GSC slots, there are alternatives, and many companies have to use that right now. There are basically possibilities to have separate interactions. That's on one hand. This is, for example, with the EMA scientific advice on one hand, and then you can have a purely national HTA consultation. In this context, we would always recommend to go to Germany because the whole GCA process is basically modeled on the evaluation. It's a German GBA. Or if you rather would prefer to have both entities in one meeting, so the regulator and the HTA body on national level, there's also the possibility to have that in Germany or Sweden as examples, or UK, while it's no longer EU, still the NICE is very much appreciated in EU and highly valued, or a little bit further outside, also in Canada. Yeah, that was my last slide, and I would then like to hand over to Thomas for his presentation. And thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, Darius. So let's try to start my presentation. 1 second, please. We have here the... Okay, let's start. So I'm going to touch more on the, let's say, preparing for EU HTA challenges, organizational issues, and elements like that. And it is pretty much on interaction between market access people, regulatory people, and other functions within the company. So that's why I highly appreciate that we have this joint meeting today to bring in both perspectives. Right. What are we talking about? Here's a high-level structure of the JCA dossier, which consists of 5 chapters, starting with an overview, background section, research questions, so the so-called PICOs. Darius touched on that already, the methods part, and then the results, followed by the appendices with 4 chapters of appendices. A little bit like the CTD, a little bit like the German AMNOG dossier, so you get the basic idea, I think. By the way, here on the left, in the back, you can see a screenshot of the first JCA dossier that has been submitted to the coordination group and which is already published. It is from Ipsen on Tophora-FINIP. Now, there are 4 major topics I would like to touch today. First of all, I would like to touch on the organizational readiness. So what does the organization need to do in order to be ready for JCA? Second element would be how JCA impacts the national HTA assessment, national pricing and reimbursement outcomes. Thirdly, early learnings from this first assessment on Tophora-FINIP, and finally, key takeaways. So let's get started with the first part. All companies that are going to face JCA need to be prepared and need some kind of organizational decision-making or organizational preparedness. There are different modes of actions, and the one extreme are companies which decide to do everything in-house, so prepare the whole dossier strategy, the whole dossier completely in-house. And the other extreme, very minimal internal involvement, do everything externally that can be done externally. And in between, different variations thereof, basically driven by 4 key elements which drive decision-making. First of all, the question, is the marketing authorization application for this specific company a one-time event, or is it something that reoccurs over time due to further indications, due to new assets that will be launched? The second question to take into account is that companies need to be able to make internal decisions on the direction of the JCA, and for this they need internal decision-making capabilities which need to be prepared. The third element, EU HTA readiness requires an organization-wide capability building. It's not only let's say the market access guy who does the heavy lifting or takes the responsibility. No, it is the organization in itself that needs to be aware and needs to get a basic understanding of what is JCA about. And fourthly, EU HTA affects multiple functions across the organization. It requires a close interaction between the different functions of the organization, so especially market access, HEOR, regulatory affairs, medical affairs, and so on and so forth. In order to prepare for this huge task, I think there are three pillars which should be taken into account. First of all, it's clarifying roles and responsibilities. So who does what? Second element is governance and processes, including resources, which is also a key element because this is quite heavy lifting and this requires additional resources because this is something new. And finally, thirdly, view this becoming ready as a project in itself with key activities, with milestones that can be mapped, that can be tracked. I've shown a similar slide to this a couple of years ago in one of my first presentations on a EU HTA, and I made the point or suggested that it would be good to start 1 year prior to the planned marketing authorization application, start preparation for JCA, and people smiled at me and said, "Hey, that's unrealistic. We don't have the final data yet. It's too early. We don't want to." I kept repeating the slide because it's still what I recommend, and now it's more the opposite that people tell me, "Hey, that's completely nuts. You need to start much more earlier, 2 years, 3 years in advance." And here my argument goes: it's great if you have the time to start that early, but be aware the earlier you start, the more assumptions you need, and the more hypothetical, the more work at risk you do, and therefore it sometimes makes sense to wait for the optimal time, and at least based on the experience we have made so far with an Ecker, it's good usually to start around 1 year prior to the actual marketing authorization application. Why do we do this whole process? Well, there is no value in itself. JCA doesn't create any value. It is meant to support national HTA and pricing decisions. And that is the reason for its existence. So one always has to go back and say, hey, what do we actually want to achieve in the national HTA and pricing negotiation? And the questions that are answered in this process are to the direction: does the drug have an additional effect or additional benefit over the national defined comparator, and is paying the drug justified? Is it affordable? And for these, a lot of questions, even beyond clinical elements, are relevant. The clinical elements of this question, or the underlying clinical questions, to say it that way, are now subject to JCA. So these questions are answered on a European level, whereas these questions are more typically national questions, because affordability is a national issue within healthcare. And finally, regulatory elements, more versus: is it safe? Is it effective? Is the benefit-risk ratio positive? So it is very important to understand that JCA report serves as a basis for national HTA processes. And I repeat saying this because a lot of people ask me, hey, what do we learn out of the first JCA report that has been published? And I'm a little bit reluctant to give a definitive answer to this question because we haven't seen the national HTA processes so far. We expect the first assessment to be published in Germany mid of August. Right. What are the, nevertheless, there's we have the opportunity for early learnings, and I'm happy to share these early learnings, but please take it as early. So there is one JCA already completed with all the relevant documents published. Currently, we do have 14 JCAs ongoing, most of them in oncology, some in 18Ps. And we also have now the first accelerated assessment, which will be quite a lot of fun to observe. I think not for the company that is affected, because accelerated assessment means you don't have 100 days for dossier preparation, you have only 60 days for dossier preparation. And that means that even more work needs to be done in advance. And finally, we have the dossiers that have been withdrawn, discontinued. There is one dossier that has officially been withdrawn, that is 𝐉𝐨𝐢𝐬𝐧𝐭. And just recently, it was announced that 2 JCAs have been discontinued, 𝐾𝐲𝐻 and 𝐶𝐻. The official documents state that this discontinuation was done due to a failure in meeting the data requirements. However, please note that the regulatory process for 𝐶𝐻 has also been terminated, so the marketing authorization application has been withdrawn, and I would assume that there is some type of crosstalk. I don't know anything about the current status of the regulatory process of 𝐷𝐻, but it will be also very interesting to see whether this will be terminated or the MAA withdrawn. I don't know. Let's see. So this is the overview of all the JCAs that are currently ongoing or have been published or have been made notification of. Now let's look a little bit deeper into the first JCA that has been published. And I come back to this PICO concept that Darius already mentioned. And for 𝐹, we do have, in fact, 8 different PICOs. So 8, let's say, clinical questions that have been posed by the coordination group to the pharmaceutical company. And that's quite challenging because 4 of these PICOs have been for the full indication as per label, and another 4 with regards to different subpopulations. There are slight differences between these PICOs. At the end, it is very, very, very difficult to answer these. In essence, the company answered 2 PICOs or provided data for 2 PICOs, and only evidence for 1 PICO was actually accepted by the coordination group in their report. But this is to give you an idea of how do PICOs actually look like. So what can we learn regarding key consequences for readiness? There is an extensive methodological requirement or set of requirements even that need to be taken into account, especially with regards to ITC, so what is required for indirect treatment comparisons. Stakeholder involvement was also a key element of EU HTA legislation. So far, it is not really clear what role stakeholders actually played. It is clear that they made statements. It is not clear how these statements were actually be taken into account in the decision-making of the coordination group. The requirement of substantial pre-work was also mentioned already. If you just envision that you have 8 PICOs, that you need to present evidence for 8 PICOs, or at least present the absence of evidence for these PICOs, that is a huge chunk of work. This cannot be completed within 100 days, so you need to do this in advance and then just update it. And that's still a lot of work to do. If you look at the JCA report, the JCA report discusses in extenso methodological limitations and uncertainty of the evidence that is presented. There is very little language around unmet need, innovation, rarity, pediatric contracts, so elements that could be of relevance as well for decision making, but it was surprisingly not that much of relevance in this specific JCA report. And with regards to the potential implications for national decision making, we need to see as mentioned. Implications for organizational readiness, you definitely need sufficient resources. That is the key bottleneck. You get additional data requests even after submitting the dossier. So getting the dossier ready to submit is a lot of work, but the work doesn't end there. There is a lot of work thereafter. You get additional data request after additional data request, and you have always something around 7 or up to 15 days time to react to these data requests. There is a lot of biostats work. These you need the resources, and you need a separate biostats team that is separate to the regulatory biostats team, because the day 120 questions need to be answered as well in the same time. And you need cross collaboration between the relevant department in order to ensure consistencies between all this messaging. Key takeaways: start early, think strategically, try to anticipate the PCAs. You need a governance, but keep the governance lean and clear. We had early examples of companies which started with teams of more than 100 people inside the company, plus external support, and that's definitely, I would say, overambitious. Use pilots as learning tools to test, try this out, do internal PICO training, PICO simulation in order to get everyone aware of and creating an understanding what does PICO mean. Or if you are familiar with glioblastoma as an organization, use tuforafenib as a case study, which can provide some insights. Try to balance involvement with efficiency. Not everyone needs to be involved fully. This is just overambitious, as mentioned before. So try to get the right trade-off. This is an evolving system. We're just talking about the first JCA being published. Most companies will undergo this process on a continuous basis. So it is important to evaluate, to improve, to get feedback into the organization and think about what can we do better next time. And finally, think of your operating model. How do you want to prepare for JCA within the organization? What is your way of working, and try to make a conscious decision for this, so that you as an organization being ready, and if you have defined an operating model, this is maybe not the ultimate operating model, but it is a good start, and then adapt it as it makes sense. Great. With that, thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and Darius as well, for your great presentations. Yes, so we will open now Q&A session. So we already have one question in chat. So question is for Darius. Thank you for the insightful presentation. Early consultation with the JSC and national bodies clearly makes sense. However, for pipeline products and new indications that are not yet within the scope of the GSA, sponsors still need to make timely decisions on pivotal study designs. Given the potentially large number of requests, how feasible and scalable is this consultation process in practice? And do you foresee any capacity constraints that could limit its effectiveness?
Yeah, I would say it's almost more a question for Thomas, but I possibly makes a start here. I think there is a capacity constraint of the entities that organize the GSC. I mean, that's what we are seeing. let's see if they really have taken into account that, and I would agree with this comment here from Mustafa, that certainly once we get to the world of indication extensions, there may be wider need for these interactions and a higher number. I think overall also for all the other products, I mean, especially once we look at 2030 and preparation for 2030, I think also it could be kind of an explosion of the need for these kind of meetings because at the moment it's really a limited group with this oncology process, new active substances, and the ATMP is anyway a rather small group. So yeah, I would agree. So could be some concern on that.
Maybe to add on your answer, Darius, there are limitations in terms of capacity, but it still makes sense to give it a try. You can already apply now not only for oncology and ATMP, but you can also apply for products that are not yet in scope of JCA, because if you're looking for an MAA for an orphan drug in 2028, you already you maybe are working on the study design or should work on the study design. So there is need for input and there is this availability to get input. So give it a try, knowing that it is not guaranteed. If you don't get that slot, there are alternative ways, and that's also very important. And let's say the standard textbook approach is go to key countries which have rather unlimited capacity because they charge for that, being typically Germany and UK being out of EU, but nevertheless providing helpful feedback for especially cost effectiveness countries for market access. And then maybe there's also an opportunity for France and other countries. So it makes sense to think of this in a broader way.
Yes, exactly. So this is exactly what we did in a couple of situations where slots were limited, and then our clients actually decided to go to Germany, and then we conduct national German consultations where it's still decisions on pivotal study designs and endpoints can be still included, so that at the end you are ready and have adequate information when the time for the pricing decisions comes. Okay. There is one additional question: is whether there is an accelerated JCA is linked with maybe a prime status?
Yeah, I mean,
not. Please, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So also we'll start with the regulatory part. So technically not, I fully agree, because it's two different things. So it's two different worlds. One is from the HTA, one is from the regulatory process. However, certainly once the product gets prime, there's a certain likelihood in case the development is successful that it always also goes to accelerated assessment in the regulatory world. And then certainly also the accelerated timelines for the JCA apply. And as Thomas already indicated, for one example that is upcoming, this will be, I think, very interesting to monitor how this will work out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what is important, this the timeline for the JCA is linked to the accelerated regulatory process. So and here it becomes very important. So listen closely. It depends on how you enter this process. So if you request accelerated and this accelerated assessment is granted, then you are in this 60-day period, even though you at a later point in time switch back to the regulatory to the regular regulatory timeline. So I think a recommendation, at least from as being a non-regulatory person, is be very careful on whether or not you request accelerated assessment, because this creates a lot of problems in terms of market access.
Yeah, I would agree with this recommendation also in the context that indeed, I don't have the statistics now in my head. However, there is a relevant number of products that are then reclassified indeed from the accelerated assessment to the normal timelines from the EMA, mostly due to, for example, GMP inspection reasons. And then you're stuck, as Thomas explained, on the HTA side. So there would be then nothing but downside actually in that. So, but I mean, this is a strategic decision. Certainly will also depend on the actual case which we're looking at.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, there is additional question for Thomas. If we look at the different comparators in the published JCA reports and in the PICO simulation exercises, these show a broad spectrum, from very old, obsolete drugs in some cases to EIO. So can the therapeutics really be described with one voice? Yeah.
Difficult question. Hi, Ulrike. Great that you joined. Well, I think it is a matter of fact that the therapeutic landscape in the different countries is very different. Nevertheless, the ambition of JCA is to consolidate, and what we see now, what we would have seen in the for FINIP case with 8 PICOs, I would say, well, that's suboptimal. And one could even argue or ask, where's the point having so many PICOs, and most of them without data, because it doesn't make any sense to generate data, and there is no need for the individual member state to justify why they need this specific PICO. They just request it. But from a, let's say, long-term perspective or longer-term perspective, maybe there is some hope that requirements will converge, and we will hopefully end up with a lower number of PICOs. Why am I optimistic? And I know that this is recorded, so I need to be careful. I'm optimistic because I speak to regulatory people here in this call, and we have seen a similar process with EMA. And once EMA was introduced, there was also a discussion of, is this possible to consolidate this regulatory process into one? And I think now this question is answered. It works. Full stop.
Yeah. Okay, there is additional question. Could you share the slides after the webinar, please? Yes, we will share slides and transcripts, so and the recording. Any further questions? You can also speak up, so not just leave in chat. So if you have anything, please go ahead. Okay.
But maybe maybe let's use the opportunity to reiterate some key points and use the opportunity to speak to people with mostly having a regulatory background. So I think this is still very challenging because regulatory process is established, things are working quite smoothly, and at least from the market access perspective, regulatory people make the impression that they know what they do. On the market access side, on contrary, this is quite new. We have limited idea what to do. We try to figure out, and we need your understanding that we need your support, but we don't actually know where to go exactly. And maybe we tell you one thing this day and something else tomorrow because things have changed, because this is still evolving. And it is very, very important to have this very close interaction between regulatory and market access so that the people from market access have a good understanding what is going on regulatory wise. And the earlier that we know, the better we know. This is definitely helpful, even though this might not be standard practice so far, but I think JCA changes this to some extent. And therefore,
Yes.
we need your support.
Yes, absolutely. So the process has just started. So I think there will be now learnings made, and definitely what we expect also to see that also JCA will be streamlined, will be adapted to I would say match the regulatory process, and then also to kind of connect to the final national pricing steps that you still need to do nationally after you pass through the whole JCA and the let's say centralized procedure. Then you step into the national realm where you still need to discuss the pricing part. So as you also commented, somewhere in probably August, we might get a feedback on this, how this kind of translates into the national pricing decisions. And I think from this whole process, learnings will be made and then adaptations made along the lines and in upcoming months and years. Okay.
Use the opportunity to turn this around and chase your market access people on what are their learnings, because it's not only one way. One side has to give and the other has to support. No, I think it is in both directions.
So, and I also would like to mention that at least personally for me, it's also a great learning experience. We learn about the HTA world and the concepts in there, because this was really a word a little bit unknown to me before. You have your standard functions that you work with all the time as a regulated professional, clinical, non-clinical, CMC, that's everyday work. But market access was a little bit more exotic. But now, and I also appreciate very much here now this interaction. I really start. It's a long way still, but I think I get some basic concepts by now, and it needs to start at somewhere.
Great. Okay. So I would like to thank, if there are no any further questions, so I would like to thank to our speakers and to all of you joining this webinar. If you have any further questions or follow up, please just feel free to write us. So we will be happy to support, answer any questions. We will be sharing recordings and the presentations from this webinar, and of course, be on the lookout for new webinars that will be coming also very soon. Thank you very much. Wishing you a great day. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Very well done.